There are millions of podcasts being done all over the world that take on the personalities of their creator. Some bring in thousands of listeners each week. Some bring in large amounts of revenue, while others entertain millions and help sell products. If you're like many podcasters, you want to reach your maximum potential. But how? How do you make your podcast stand out from all the rest? Join Dr. Barrett Matthews as he talks to experts who are doing it on The Productive Podcaster. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Productive Podcaster. I am Dr. Barrett Matthews, and welcome to another episode. I have a fantastic guest for you today. You're really going to love her. You're really going to love her. But I want to tell you something. For those of you who are listening to The Productive Podcaster for the very first time, and for those of you who've been listening for a while, let me tell you what the show is about. This is a podcast for podcasters. That's right. If you are interested in becoming a podcaster, or if you have an existing podcast, but you're wondering, are you doing the right thing? Should you do this before you start? Is this okay to do? Let me tell you something. There's no cookie cutter way to run a podcast. And what I do on The Productive Podcaster is I bring people to you who have productive podcasts, and they're doing it their own way. You can get ideas from them, you can get tips from them, but here's the thing. You got to get started and get your own going, and that's what we're here to do at The Productive Podcaster. So you all know me. I like to start the Productive Podcaster show doing one thing, and that is pros and cons.
Pros and cons.
Now, what is pros and cons? Pros and cons is my way of helping you to become a better podcaster. So I give you a tip to help you become a pro when it comes to podcasting. And today I want to talk to you about this. You can use some literary devices. You can use some catchphrases. You can do whatever you want to do to get your podcast going, but you don't want to bore your audience. You don't want to. See, some people out there who are doing podcasts, they know so much information. They have so many facts, so many figures, and they want to let the audience know, but they don't know how to communicate it in a way that keeps the audience engaged. So one thing I can tell you is this. You may want to talk a little faster. You don't want to bore your audience by talking like this. So you may want to talk a little faster. You want to pick up some phrases or use some analogies, use some metaphors, tell some stories. Stories always do well. And you want to smile. Let your audience know that you're happy. It doesn't have to be on camera. You can smile off camera. They can tell you're smiling when you're talking. So make sure that you're happy about what you're doing. But doing those things, using metaphors, using stories, all those things help in becoming a productive podcaster. So as I mentioned to you a second ago, we have a fantastic guest today. We're going to take a break right now, but when we come back, I have something special for you here on The Productive Podcast. We'll be right back after this.
You've heard the rumblings. You've even thought of starting your own. But how? Everybody knows podcasting is the fastest and best way to get your message out and grow your business all at once. Although everybody knows this, nobody showed you what to do. Well, Podcast Nation is ready to do all the heavy lifting for you while you just deliver your message and grow. Join the nation and start your podcast today. Text podcast to 929-244-4323 and make them hear your voice.
Do you hear what I hear? That's the sound of your tribe, your audience, your people. That's the sound of your nation. The people who love to hear the sound of your voice as you bring your special message to them in your very own podcast. How do you get it to them? Let us handle that. We're Podcast Nation, and we make sure they hear your voice. Podcast Nation is a full-service podcasting firm that does all the hard work for you so you can be the talent and get your message to your people. Just text podcast to 929-244-4323 and talk to one of our staff on how you can get started with your very own done-for-you podcast. Or just go to podcastnation.com and get started today. That's PODCAST nation.com. Your people are waiting on you. Make them hear your voice. Podcast Nation.
welcome back to the Productive Podcaster. I am Dr. Barrett Matthews, and as I shared with you before, I have a fantastic guest today. This is really going to excite a lot of people. Her name is Victoria Vives Khuong. She is an international best-selling author. The book is called In a Matter of Seconds. And in a matter of seconds, guys, we're going to bring her on. Let me tell you something. She's helped a lot of women all over the world get greater fulfillment in their lives because she does a podcast called Divine Sexuality. That's right. She's going to talk to you guys about that. She's going to talk to you about her book. She's going to talk to you about how she can help you. And she's going to tell you why you need to be subscribing to her podcast. I'm telling you guys, you need to do it. Do it today. Not in a matter of weeks, not in a matter of hours, but in a matter of seconds. So I'm going to bring you right now to the Productive Podcaster, none other than Victoria Vives Khuong. Victoria, welcome to the Productive Podcaster.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to connect with you.
I am happy to have you here, man. You and I, we met on an online summit about a month or so ago, I guess now. Yeah. And it seems like time flew by real quickly. But I just love your energy. I connected with her energy right off the bat. And I was like, oh, gosh, I want to have her as a guest on my show. So I invited her to be a part of the show. Now, let's talk about your podcast first. Tell everyone about your podcast.
Yes, so it's the Divine Sexuality podcast. And I focus on women. However, I also have a lot of men in my audience because they learn about how to understand sexuality in women, which sometimes can be complicated.
Yeah. We don't have enough time for that. But yes, I mean, now let me ask you something. As far as the podcast, what led you to that particular topic?
Good question. Yeah, so it's an interesting question because for years I had my YouTube channel and I also had a radio show. And in those two channels, what I was doing was very diverse. So I was going into many different healing arts or things about nature. So it was a little bit all over the place and I enjoyed it. However, I realized that I cannot spread myself so far if I want to really, really go deeper. So because of that, I decided what is that I did in the world that I taught other people that really made the greatest transformation. Mm-hmm. And I realized that was divine sexuality because it's what is at the core of who we are. Like sexuality, sex is what brings us to be here on this earth. Otherwise, we cannot be born. And it really drives the rest of our lives at one level or another. So because of that, I feel that by really fine-tuning that aspect in our lives, all the rest can be elevated.
Okay, now, divine sexuality. Where did the word divine come from with sexuality? How do they tie together?
Yes, so great question. Thank you for asking that. In sexuality, there are so many aspects, and we have a lot of stigma when it comes to this aspect of our lives. And even though it's something so natural, it has become a taboo, something sometimes shameful, or that brings guilt. So there is a lot of negative connotations around this theme. So when we talk about divine sexuality, we are elevating sexuality out of the gutter of objectification and shame and guilt, so that we elevate it into the realm of self-actualization, profound intimacy, and even expanded consciousness. So we are taking it to a whole different level and understanding how it ties into the other aspects of our lives. It's not just sex. Our sexuality is really connected to many other aspects of our lives. And in order for us to be completely fulfilled, we really want to clear anything that is pulling us down when it comes to sexuality.
True. Now, I have to ask you, your book, In a Matter of Seconds, does that tie into your podcast as well?
It does not. So my book, In a Matter of Seconds, is more about a holistic perspective, meaning that it talks about the 4 keys to freedom. And these keys to freedom are ways in which we can easily in our lives free ourselves. Sometimes we feel that we are a little bit trapped, that there are some limitations as to what we can accomplish. So my book is an autobiography in which I share how I discovered these 4 keys to freedom and how the reader can apply them to their lives. And sometimes, seriously, there are miracles occurring when you apply them.
That's wonderful. Now, you see what I do with my guest guys, how I make sure let them get a shameless plug in about their products. So
Oh, thank you.
no problem, no problem. I wanted to make sure that she got that in about her book too, because you all need to be, supporting her. That's what I want to make sure that you all do that with my guests. So fantastic. So back to your podcast, back to Divine Sexuality. Now, like you said, some people can see it as taboo.
Mm.
What kind of pushback have you gotten from people?
That's an interesting thing that, I come from Europe, and I thought that we were very repressed there because I grew up. I grew up in Madrid under an ultra-conservative regime. So there was a dictatorship, and sex was strictly for procreation. So we were very repressed. But then what happened is that the dictator died. So everything went to the other extreme. So suddenly people were super free and liberated. So we changed, and that still persists nowadays. So I thought that we were repressed, but I realized that actually we're not. We were kind of liberated. So now when I speak here about sexuality, sometimes, especially the younger generations, are very free. Like they don't have this stigma in general. But when we talk about the previous generations, then there is sometimes a little bit like a little bit of apprehensive behavior, like, oh, I don't know if this is something that we can talk about, especially publicly. This should be a secret that you keep for yourself. And, in fact, I do believe that there is a place for that. The way I grew up, I'm a little bit prude. At the same time, I want to make sure that I have a healthy sexuality and that I help women achieving that as well.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean let's get crazy and, go out of our minds about sexuality. It's not about that.
Right.
It's about this is a subject that is part of your health. It's part of your basic needs, and it's something that we need to deal with. It's not like we can escape it. So instead to put it away and try to avoid it, see how it is affecting your life. How is your relationship with your body? If you are not comfortable in your body, how are you going to present yourself to our business meeting, to an exam, whatever you have to do? It's like we really need to be comfortable in our bodies. And then with our relationships, creating intimacy with our partners. We don't want to fall in going through divorce because we are not able to keep that relationship with our partners. We need that bond. We don't want a sexless marriage. So these are things that are important and are at the foundation of our families. Like if we want to have beautiful families, we need to address these issues.
Now, how has your podcast grown since you started it? As far as, because like I said, you have a very interesting topic, and you have a niche market because you focus mainly on women. So how has it grown over time? And are there any things that you can specifically point to that help make that growth happen?
Well, so my podcast started around June, so it's really, really new.
Wow.
Yes, it's really new. And it is not, my work mostly is directly with people. So what I mean is I have a school here in Los Angeles. Now with distancing, we are meeting online, but that's where I put most of my efforts.
Yeah.
And then the podcast is almost like a way of sharing with the world and also benefiting people that maybe have not had the opportunity to join the classes. So it's something that I keep a little bit like in the back burner. At the same time, it's super powerful because it's bringing new people in my circles. So what I mean with this is that both my YouTube channel and my podcast are something that I dedicate almost when I have the opportunity. So I have more or less a couple of shows per month. So it's not like the mega dedication that I had with my radio show, for example, in which I was every single week, and all of my work was around that
Yeah.
radio show. Whereas here is more of a support, which I find to be incredibly rewarding for me and for my listeners. So I'm super happy to be creating a community. We have a Facebook group and everything. So it's really beautiful.
That's wonderful. So when
Thank
you
you.
started your podcast, well, I should say before you started your podcast, did you have any doubts or apprehension about starting it?
Oh, it was so interesting because I didn't really know what a podcast was.
A lot of people don't.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. Because when I had my radio show, some of my listeners were asking me, why don't you put it also on podcast? And I'm like, what is the difference? Like, I don't know. What would that do that for? And now I hear everybody, podcast. Okay, so I'm going to launch it, but I don't understand what is the benefit. And I'm absolutely loving it. Like, I love my podcast. I feel so happy to have the podcast and to create that different kind of connection with my audience and creating this community. I'm loving it.
So what would you say to someone who may have a podcast and they're trying to grow their audience? What would you say to them?
Well, persist for sure, because you will always get more listens. It's not gonna go down, right?
Right.
So over time, it will continue just adding, and you start creating this library that is going to only support what you are doing and sharing your message. And if you change the life of one person, that's amazing. I mean, that's a really incredible transformation for that person. So I feel that podcast is something truly to start putting the time in right now, because they're growing. Like, there is more and more coming up, new podcasts. So we don't want to delay. We want to do it as soon as we can to start creating that library. This is your legacy.
Yes, I agree. Now, and see, now your podcast, do you do it with video or audio?
Well, because I have my YouTube channel, which I have 6 million views on YouTube.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I have two channels. I have one for martial arts and one for healing arts.
Nice.
So for divine sexuality, I put it in healing arts, which is newer. So I have like 800,000 views on that one. So it's a way to repurpose and making sure that I continue nurturing my YouTube audience at the same time that I am building my podcast audience at the same time. So I do both. That means the same, like we are doing, you and I right now.
Yeah.
I record the video and audio at the same time.
Exactly.
It does take a little bit longer for me, because at this moment, my first season of my podcast is all solo. So that means that it's a little, it takes a little bit longer, because I like to put a nice background, a nice clothes. Like, I do it like very special and sophisticated. Whereas when I was doing interviews, it was just, the mic, like we are doing now. It's just like, okay, let's have a conversation. So definitely I'm putting a lot of dedication, but I most likely will do a second season in which I will do more of interviews.
And how many episodes do you do in a season?
That's a good question. And since the good thing about podcasts is that everything is your own,
It's your own.
I don't know yet, so we'll see. I feel until I am able to cover all the foundational information, once I feel that the message is there and that is complete, then I can start bringing.
And I hope they picked up on that. That was very good. Now, I want to point out something. The reason I asked you about the video or audio, because I want to make sure that people picked up on this. If you look behind Victoria, you see her products. I get asked all the time about, how do I monetize my podcast? You're right. Put your products on your podcast. It's your podcast. So why not put your products there? Make sure people can see what you have, then they will probably want to buy from you. I think that's brilliant. People don't know how much product placement helps. when it comes to a podcast. I need to get like, Coca-Cola or something to give me a sponsorship so I can put their drink.
Right.
Hey, I'm just saying, I'm throwing it out there if you're listening. But
let me bring some other things.
So Victoria, before I let you go, I wanted to have you just tell the audience where they can listen to your podcast and where they can see your podcast.
The best place to go is to victoriavives.com, and that is victoriavives.com, and that is my hub for all that I'm doing, which is a lot. You will see a lot of different things.
I just have you say your name again because I just loved hearing you say it with the accent.
Victoria Vives, ole!
I love it. I mean, how can I say anything after that, guys? So what we're going to do, Victoria's going to stick around. We have one more session coming up. You all know what we have coming up. We have PodQuest coming up, and she's going to help us answer an audience question. And I think this is going to be a really good question for the guest we have today. So we'll be right back with more of Victoria right after this message. So stay tuned.
You've heard the rumblings. You even thought about starting your own. But how? Everybody knows podcasting is the fastest and best way to get your message out and grow your business all at once. Although everybody knows this, nobody showed you what to do. Well, Podcast Nation is ready to do all the heavy lifting for you while you just deliver your message and grow. Join the nation and start your podcast today. Text podcast to 929-244-4323 and make them hear your voice.
Do you hear what I hear? That's the sound of your tribe, your audience, your people. That's the sound of your nation. The people who love to hear the sound of your voice as you bring your special message to them in your very own podcast. How do you get it to them? Let us handle that. We're Podcast Nation, and we make sure they hear your voice. Podcast Nation is a full-service podcasting firm that does all of the hard work for you so that you can be the talent and get your message to your people. Just text podcast to 929-244-4323 and talk to one of our staff on how you can get started with your very own done-for-you podcast. Or go to podcastnation.com and get started today. That's PODKAST nation.com. Your people are waiting on you. Make them hear your voice. Podcast Nation.
So guys, welcome back to the Productive Podcaster. I'm Dr. Barrett Matthews. I love when I'm truthful and honest about what I say. And I told you I had a great guest, and wasn't she great? So guess what? It's time for one of our favorite sections of the show, which is PodQuest.
PodQuest.
PodQuest. So this is where you, the audience, gets to ask a question, and me and my guest will answer that question for you. So the question we have today, and I'm going to have Victoria answer this first. The question is, Barrett, I have some very unsavory language. That's what they have. Unsavory language that I use when I talk to people. And I'm wondering, would I be able to do a podcast using the language that I use? So Victoria, I'll let you answer it first.
The answer is drum roll. Yes, you can do that. Absolutely. And the reason why is because if you do that and you have that unsavory language, you will find other people that have the same way of speaking. And when they are hearing you speaking so freely in the way that you are, they will feel that connection and they will tune into you and see what you have to say. So absolutely, just make sure to put, if it is like cursing and all of that, you might have to put explicit in your show.
Yeah, very good, very good. And I agree with her. I personally don't use it, but yes, you can. I've told them, I said, this is not an FCC type of thing. So you're not getting, regulated by the FCC. No one's going to send you a fine for using language. But the thing is, like she said, you're gonna find people that relate to you and how you speak. Let me tell you something. I went to a conference a while ago, a podcasting conference, and I realized there that there's a podcast about anything and everything. If your audience is out there, you just have to find your audience. If you use unsavory language, if you use the most pristine language, there is an audience for you for anything. You have to find your audience. Now, you may turn some people off, but guess what? That means they weren't your audience. So, like, for instance, I may talk about different things that people may not want to listen to. Victoria may talk about things that people may not want to listen to. That means they're not your audience. Now, the funny thing about this, and Victoria, you know this as well, there may be some people that cannot stand what you talk about, yet they tune in every time.
That's true.
Yeah, so you can't figure people out sometimes. I mean, but there are people who can't stand you. They will talk about you badly all the time, but they listen every time. So it's just something you have to be aware of. So on that note, that is Pod Question. For those of you who are wondering, how do you get your question answered? All you have to do is subscribe to our Facebook group, which is The Productive Podcaster, and you can find out all those things about the show, and you can put a question in there, and we can see if we'll bring your question up on The Productive Podcaster. I want to take this time right now to thank Victoria Vives Khuong for joining the show. I know I didn't pronounce it as well as you do, but I want to thank you for joining me, guys. Check out her podcast, Divine Sexuality. As a matter of fact, I want you guys to go subscribe right now, Divine Sexuality. Go subscribe right now. Go to her website. Check her out. Go to her YouTube page. Make sure you guys support her and make her podcast number one. How about that? So. You're going to make her number one. But the thing is, guys, I want you to support her, and I want to thank you, Victoria, for joining us today on The Productive Podcaster.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Appreciate you so much. So, guys, what we're going to do right now is we're going to go to our podcast profile. Our podcast profile is simply this. I listened to a podcast, and I thought that you guys may be interested in hearing about it. Yeah. That's that simple. I thought you guys may be interested in hearing about it. And this podcast is called Conspiracy Theories. And it is just about that. They tackle some of the conspiracy theories that are out there and go in depth with the stories behind them. It's fun. It's put out by the Parcast Network for Conspiracy Theories. Check it out. And also, now it's time for our podcast giveaway. It's our giveaway. I'm going to give away an audiobook of my bestseller, Why Didn't You Get It Done? I'm going to give an audiobook of my bestseller, Why Didn't You Get It Done, to Keena Starkey. You get a copy of my book. I'm going to send that to you. And you're probably wondering yourself out there, well, how come I don't get a gift? Well, once again, subscribe. Subscribe to The Productive Podcast on our Facebook group. All you got to do is join a Facebook group. You may get your name called as well. So that's all I want you guys to do. Also, subscribe to The Productive Podcaster. Now, the last segment of the show is one I enjoy as a productive podcast. I like giving you guys a productivity quote. The productivity quote today is, don't think about what can happen in a month. Don't think about what can happen in a year. Just focus on the 24 hours in front of you and do what you can to get closer to where you want to be. That is by the great Eric Thomas. I love Eric Thomas. So make sure that you guys are doing that. That's your productivity quote for today. Look, everybody. I told you I had a great guest today, and we did. I told you we had a great show for you today, and we did. All I want you to do is one thing. I want you guys to make sure you go subscribe to the show. Now, here's the thing. You can listen to The Productive Podcaster on Apple, iTunes, Google Podcasts. You can listen to it on Spotify, on Stitcher, on iHeartRadio, and on TuneIn. You can go to YouTube and watch us on YouTube. Just go Productive Podcaster. You can find us there. All the great episodes, and you can listen to it over and over again. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to share it with your friends. I want you to tell everybody about The Productive Podcaster so they can listen in and join you in the fun and listen to some of the great guests and great topics we have here on the show today. So before I sign off, I just want to say to you guys what I always say, and that is, don't just settle for being awesome. Set your goal to all them all. And take action, everybody. We'll see you next time on The Productive Podcaster. Thank you for joining us on The Productive Podcaster. Be sure to join us next time for another great show. We welcome your engagement, so make sure you participate by joining the Productive Podcaster Facebook group and chime in. Also, share the Productive Podcaster with some of your friends right now. If you have a podcast and you're looking for guests, or if you would like to be a guest on a podcast, join our podcast exchange at www.podcastworlddirectory.com. We'll see you next time.